It's the hair. That's right. Out.
Have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, former New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton.
Thank you very much.
Good evening. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'd like to talk to you about the book Turnaround, my reasons for writing it, and what I hope to accomplish by speaking about my 27 years in American policing. The book Turnaround is intended to speak to the sea change that is now occurring in American policing. American policing is undergoing a very significant change in direction. For most of the 25 years that I spent in the police profession, starting in 1970, American police were focused on responding to crime. 911 response, after-the-fact investigations, clearance rates, arrest rates. The reason we were focused on responding to crime after the fact was American society, beginning in the late 1960s, said to American police, we believe that crime in society is caused by societal factors such as demographics, racism, poverty, the economy, jobs, joblessness. None of these are things that we think the police can do anything about. While society figures out what to do about these issues, we expect you, the police, to focus your energies on improving your response to what crime does occur. And by improving that response, we hope that maybe crime will not increase and maybe it will go down. Well, for most of the last 25 years, American police responded to that direction. And unfortunately, it was the wrong direction for us to go in. And the results became quite evident, particularly into the 1980s with the explosion of the drug problem, particularly the problem of crack cocaine. Because with crack cocaine came increasing violence, increasing use of firearms to support the drug trade. And American police were really not prepared to deal with that new type of problem. So in the book, I talk about the period of time in the 1970s when American police effectively depoliced the streets of America. We took our police off walking beats, we took them out of neighborhoods and put them into police cars, and we had them ride around neighborhoods. And we hoped by our mobility that increased presence, we would deter crime. We hoped by improving our response time to what crime did occur, we would increase citizen satisfaction that the police were responding to the concerns of citizens. We hoped that by increasing the numbers of arrests, that we would satisfy the demand that something be done about the crime and disorder that was occurring in our neighborhoods. And we hoped by improving our investigative techniques that we would solve more crime. Well, unfortunately, none of that happened. There were just too many 911 calls, so our response time worsened instead of improving. The disorder in our streets, police were not expected to deal with a lot of societal issues that were occurring in the 1970s. We decriminalized public drunkenness so that drinking problems expanded significantly in terms of that problem on the streets. We deinstitutionalized many of our mental institutions, and many of those poor souls who were supposed to go into neighborhood treatment centers instead ended up as the homeless population that became so large in the 70s and 80s in our cities with all of their disorder problems. And increasingly, the continuing breakdown of family structure and family values in the United States led to more and more disintegration of families and more young people who had no structure and no guidance. And these were people who were very susceptible to the new influences in our streets, in which pimps and prostitutes and drug dealers were the role models in our inner cities. And increasingly young people learned from them rather than from families. And our schools also had problems in terms of they became the substitute family. And they were not geared up to deal with that, much the same as the police were not geared up to deal with the new societal issues we were dealing with. Well, this all really came to a head in the mid to late 1980s with the explosion of the drug problem, particularly crack cocaine. And many of our cities looked like they were going down for the count, and police were increasingly ineffective in dealing with the crime problem. Our response to it was not adequate. It was not sufficient. But fortunately, in the mid-1980s, many police leaders, academics, politicians, media, community leaders began to understand we were going to have to do something different. and if we were to maintain our cities, if we were to maintain our American way of life. And what they began to develop is something that has now come to be known as community policing. And community policing is the new direction that American police forces should be going toward, going in. And community policing is very different than the old professional model that we practiced in the 70s and 80s. The professional model emphasized rapid response, it emphasized random patrol in our police cars, and it emphasized reactive investigations, investigations after the fact. I call it the 3 R's. Community policing is very different. Community policing is about the 3 P's. First P is partnership. Police working with communities, working with other elements in the criminal justice system, partnering up to expand the resources that we can commit to the second P, dealing with problems. Because all of those 911 calls were oftentimes generated by a problem that manifested itself in many calls to the police. And if we focused on eliminating the problem, we would eliminate a lot of those calls, and we would reduce citizen dissatisfaction with our lack of response or our slow response to those calls. And thirdly, what community policing is all about, it's a return to the overall goal of police is to prevent crime. In the 1840s, Sir Robert Peel created the London Metropolitan Police, the British Bobby, the idea of putting a uniformed police officer in the street who by his presence and his uniform would prevent crime and who would get to know the neighborhood that he was policing. Well, in the 1990s in America, we were returning to that basic concept. What President Clinton is attempting to do with the 100,000 extra police, what many cities around the country are attempting to do with more police, to put them back into the neighborhoods to work with people on what the problems are that the neighborhoods want to have addressed. And increasingly we have found that those problems are not necessarily just serious crime, the murders, the rapes, the robberies, the burglaries, but what many people want to have addressed are those so-called quality of life problems that beset so many neighborhoods. Street prostitution, street drug dealing, noisy kids on the corner, public drinking, public urination, graffiti. Things that if left undeterred, if you let people get away with that, neighborhoods begin to deteriorate, businesses close, landlords don't invest in property, property deteriorates, and eventually the neighborhood begins to die. And we have found that police, and this is the theme of my book, that police, if managed differently, if focused strategically on serious crime, but also focusing on trying to do something about the quality of life offenses for the first time in 20 years, that we can have major impact on those issues. And in New York City is probably the most vivid example, because during the period 1994 to 1996, when I was police commissioner there, working with Mayor Rudolph Giuliani, who had campaigned on the platform that he would do something about crime, we reduced crime by 40% in those 2 years. We reduced homicides by 50%. But as importantly, we began to change the way the streets felt, because we authorized and ordered and directed New York's 38,000 police. We had a lot of police. We had enough police to begin to start correcting and controlling the misbehavior that for 20 years we had paid no attention to. Society had told us, this is not important. Focus on 911 calls, focus on solving serious crime. These disorder, disturbance types of offenses, well, we're a permissive society. We think we can tolerate some degree of aberrant behavior. Well, we came to painfully learn that if you don't correct that aberrant behavior, it gets more and more serious, and over time leads to more and more crime and more deterioration. So what we effectively did in New York, and what is happening in many other American cities, is we are taking back streets that we effectively de-policed in the 1970s. We're re-policing them. We're putting police back into them, but the police aren't just there. They're doing something. They're correcting behavior. They're effectively, and this is the takeaway theme of my book, we're using police to control behavior to such an extent that we are now changing it, so that people who thought they could get away with drinking in public, people who thought they could get away with urinating in public, people who thought they could ride the subways without paying their fare, are learning that somebody is going to challenge that behavior, and that somebody is the police, because we are no longer going to tolerate it. Why? Because the public has said to us through the politicians that we are fed up. We want our streets back. We want our neighborhoods back. And so we, the police, are responding to that citizen demand. And we're responding in a way that we are showing that we can have clear-cut success. And that success has been very meaningful in New York. You're starting to see some of it in other cities around the country. And the good news is that police are back. Police are back in the way in which we were intended to be in the first place. To be a presence in the neighborhood, through our actions, through our visibility, to deter crime, working with the neighborhood, working on their priorities to improve the quality of neighborhoods. And so I happen to believe that we had it all wrong as a society for 25 years. That crime is not necessarily caused by societal problems. Crime oftentimes causes those societal problems. That where you have a neighborhood that's crime-ridden, businesses flee, the economy gets worse, there are no jobs, people don't have as much money to fix up their homes, homes deteriorate, problems develop within the family because there is not enough money. And effectively, crime is the cancer that was causing so many of those societal problems. So the takeaway from the book is that we may have had it backwards in terms of dealing with the crime issue, and that we can, in fact, empower and trust our police, if properly led, properly authorized, to be more effective than they have been in the past. And that's the good news. I'm an optimist about crime in the sense of our ability to deal with it, our ability to reduce it. There's an old adage that if you can make it in New York, you can make it anywhere. Well, in New York's been making it the last couple of years. The overall crime rate since 1990 in New York City, it's now down 8 straight years. Crime in that city is down over 50%. Murders are down over 65%. That's phenomenal declines in crime. In 1990 in New York City, there were 700,000 victims of violent crime in the city of New York. In 1998, that figure will be around 300,000. That's a lot of lives that have been saved. That's a lot of lives that have been improved. And a key player in all of this has been the police. And the theme of the book, Turnaround, is that police are back. And the theme of the book, Turnaround, is that police are back, and they're back in the right way, and they're back where they belong, in the streets of America. Thank you.
It's the hair. That's right. And
Have it.
Ladies and gentlemen, former New York City Police Commissioner Bill Bratton.
Thank you very much. Good evening. And unfortunately, it was the wrong direction for us to go in. And the results became quite evident, particularly into the 1980s with the explosion of the drug problem, particularly the problem of crack cocaine. Because with crack cocaine came increasing violence, increasing use of firearms to support the drug trade. And American police were really not prepared to deal with that new type of problem. So in the book, I talk about the period of time in the 1970s. The next 10 or 15 minutes, I'd like to talk to you about the book Turnaround, my reasons for writing it, and what I hope to accomplish by speaking about my 27 years in American policing. The book Turnaround is intended to speak to the sea change that is now occurring in American policing. American policing is undergoing a very significant change in direction. For most of the 25 years that I spent in poverty, the economy, jobs, joblessness, none of these are things that we think the police can do anything about. While society figures out what to do about these issues, we expect you, the police, to focus your energies on improving your response to what crime does occur. And by improving that response, we hope that maybe crime will not increase and maybe it will go down. Well, for most of the last 25 years, American police responded to that direction. In the police profession, starting in 1970, American police were focused on responding to crime. 911 response, after-the-fact investigations, clearance rates, arrest rates. The reason we were focused on responding to crime after the fact was American society, beginning in the late 1960s, said to American police, we believe that crime in society is caused by societal factors such as demographics, racism,